I've kind of lived around here most of my life, actually, and unfortunately I'm sufficiently old enough to remember when this ground where we're at now, Copthall, was actually built in 1964, I think, and it was then, of course, a state-of-the-art stadium, you know, a proper stand and all that sort of thing. And then over about the next 40 years, it dilapidated, and then we were lucky enough to come here and revive it. Really, because of the pitch, actually, because it's a artificial pitch. It's a carpet, essentially, but you know, modern technology carpet. It makes it a genuine community stadium, because obviously, if you've got grass, no one's allowed to go on the grass because you ruin the grass. But if it's got carpet, then all the kids come here, the school sports days come here, charity groups come here. I spent most of the day waiting to get through lessons so I can go out and play any sport there was, you know, football, rugby, squash, anything. You know, the last two lessons in the afternoon, I remember, were interminable, because obviously, you know, you just wanted to get rid of the damn thing and go and play sport. Oddly enough, I went there to read classics, Latin and Greek, and it was only literally on the way down, I thought, this is ridiculous. I don't want to do Latin and Greek. I've never enjoyed it. And I actually got there, and amazingly enough, rather than telling me to go away, they said, well, what do you want to do? And that sort of foxed me. I hadn't even thought about that. So I just said, economics. And so I did economic and economic history, and I enjoyed the history bit. That was exciting. I was brought up on Spurs, as anybody in North London born here, because rugby union in those days, oddly enough, on Saturday afternoon television, it was rugby league. It was Wakefield, Trinity, Neil Fox. So I was brought up watching rugby league on the television, which is why it's so strange that rugby league almost doesn't take place in London. And it's obviously after football, of course, it's rugby union. And rugby union then was a staggeringly boring game, because you could kick the ball into touch and you got the throw-in. So you gave it back to yourself and you kicked into touch again. And the pitches, of course, in those days for all sport were terrible. There's mud heaps. So it was a really boring game, and I think it's become a lot better now. But I was brought up on football, you know, so I still love football, and I'm a huge cricket fan, of course. And so really, you know, team sports. I'm not a big fan of non-team sports. I like that team sharing. I think that's much more fun. When rugby went professional in 1995, I thought, well, I've always enjoyed the game, you know, and as it happened, Saracens, who are my local side, though I wasn't a fan of Saracens in those days, came and approached me, and so it actually began like that. And I said, well, no, I don't want to sponsor you, but I don't mind owning 80%, I think it was, owning 80% of the club and trying to build the club. But of course, in those days, nobody knew what the commitment was going to be. I mean, it sounds silly now, but Saracens' turnover in 1995 for the entire club was £52,000 per annum. That's not even a good academy player now. We had to take up the dog mess off the pitch before players could train or play. I mean, even in the professional era, we started like that and had conversations in 1995, 96, I can still remember, as to whether we should have a full-time coach. I mean, I think it's about 10 or 12 now, but I mean, the game was so in its infancy then. But it takes a long, long time to get into somebody's culture. And the culture of the big cities in this country is football. It's Arsenal, Spurs, West Ham, Manchester United, Manchester City, and Manchester, etc., etc. So it's difficult for a sport to break in. And also the Premier League must have been one of the outstanding business successes of all time. And that takes all the attention, or to a certain extent excludes other sports. Where rugby's lucky is that it gets disproportionate coverage in newspapers like the Sunday Telegraph, the Sunday Times, that sort of newspaper, not the Mirror and the Sun, but you know, those sort of papers. It gets disproportionate coverage, presumably because readers of those newspapers and what you might call the AB ones or whatever it is prefer rugby. But I didn't think it would take as long. I remember watching the European Cup in the early days when sides like Toulouse were winning it, and just I'd never even considered the fact that we might win the European Cup. It was in Lyon, and it was fantastic, obviously. And as I've said before, Saturday night was sort of a blur because you have far too much alcohol, as you'd expect. Sunday was fine, and then interestingly enough, on Monday it was, well, what was all that about? Well, where do we go next? Because actually, triumph in a way is very short-lived. It's fantastic. Triumph, winning something is fantastic, but it doesn't last long. You've then got to get on with it, and cause there's not much point being great once, and then falling all the way down again. You've got to keep it going. I don't think I'm boasting when I say that it can't be competed with or repeated, because they're all one-offs, and I've got them. So I've got Bobby Moore's shirt, I've got Roger Bannister's stopwatch, all that sort of stuff. The gloves that Henry Cooper wore when he knocked Ali out, put Ali on the floor for the first time Ali ever hit the floor, those gloves are here as well. And to me, all that you've got to, I didn't start off like this, but I'm looking around for one-offs that has to be iconic. If Muhammad Ali's gold medal from the Olympics of 1960 ever turned up, but he may or may not have thrown it into the Mississippi in disgust, so we don't know. But so I'm assuming that doesn't exist. Jesse Owens' gold medal, of the 4 he got, was sold, there's only one they know that's in existence, was sold for $1.25 million to somebody. So, there aren't many really iconic things, and if they are, and they're sort of world-class like that, genuine warmth you felt in the room, from Barnet, the councillors, across all the parties, to Saracens. And that's actually, it's very humbling actually, when one felt that. You've got to include kids, and sport is the most powerful language in the world. One at President Mandela's great quote in the middle of it, he said about sports, sport has the power to change the world. He said, sport speaks to youth in a language they can understand. And that's what, because that's where you can include kids in the team, because they love sport, they are attracted to sport, and you can use sport as a vehicle for improving lives, obviously fitness, but education, everything in my view. It's a hugely powerful force for the good, and should be used like that. I am influenced by all the people around me. I mean, people who do amazing things in charity, which I could never do in a million years. The guys who coach Saracens are just dedicated, good people. The players, are outstanding. I've been influenced by many, many people, but really ordinary people. I look forward to the weekends because you go watch the kids play something or do something, or watch football or cricket or go out for cinema or whatever it is. But I also look forward to Monday. When Sunday comes around, come on, let's get on with it. I want to get back to the, I love it, and I love small companies. I'm not interested in big companies at all, because I think they've lost their heart and soul. But small companies are really interesting. You can have a relationship with the people. The people. There's dynamism there. They're creating things, and I find that process really exciting. I've heard Owen Farrell say that every time I go on the pitch, the first thing I've got to do is earn the respect of my teammates. And you think, wow, from a young man, that's quite something. One of these days, I'd love to have a quote of my own, but until then, I'm going to use other people's. This is just a beginning. Thank you.